Welcome to the Look Good, Move Well podcast.
We're starting every episode off with a segment called FBB Banter. Satya, what do we got for the people today?
Oh, man, you're putting me on the spot.
Yeah, that was right. Okay, here's my banter.
Okay.
Bachelorette, the men tell all.
Yeah.
I watched last night with my wife.
Okay.
I gotta say, I love that show.
I know you do.
Bachelorette is great. I resist it every single time it comes on. Like every new season, my wife's like, let's do it. And I'm like, and you know why I think I do that?
Because the episodes are so freaking long?
No. I think it's because I'm not supposed to like that show as a hetero man in this society.
It's like embarrassing to like it.
And I say, fuck that.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
And I like that it's real, not real. You know, it's like, it's not real because, like, in what circumstance does, like, one person date 30 other people and, like, you know, with high dollar dates every day with champagne, basically nightly, you know?
Yeah.
It doesn't really happen in anybody's reality. But, man, the emotional connections that like form and the bonds and then the lessons, like it gets more real towards the end. And like the beginning is just like reality TV, just kind of quote unquote trash, which is really entertaining.
That's fun.
Yeah. But the end, it's like seeing people like the men tell all last night, like a couple, you know, once they got through all the drama, like let's clear the air on, you know, Pizza Peter or whatever, you know, like Pizza Pete. It was really about, like, you know, people who would these guys who are like connecting for the first time with like vulnerability, being able to cry on camera.
Oh, hell yeah.
Oh my God, it's so real. Like, I'm like, I want to cry just thinking about it. I'm like, that's like The Bachelorette is inside of that show. Things transform inside of some of those men. That is the exact reason why I'm embarrassed each year to say I watched that show. And it's freaking astounding to me that, anyway, I'm going to make sure Megan listens to this little banter because, I mean, you watch a little bit of it periodically.
Oh yeah.
What's your take on the Bachelor Nation?
Okay, well, two things. One, I just love seeing people in evening dresses.
Oh,
so
yeah.
that part is really satisfying. But yeah, I like what you said about the real, not real, because you know that you're watching a very produced version of the story and it's very unrealistic. But at the same time, whenever those real moments come through of vulnerability, which do happen, that makes it even more satisfying.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah.
Well, FBB Banter, session number 1 in the books.
Yep.
Thanks, Bachelor, for giving us some juicy topics. We're talking actually today not about vulnerability, but about recovery.
Yeah.
And going back to the AMA that we did a couple weeks ago, we got some great questions on recovery. And let's just kind of give recovery like this. We're going to create a container for it.
Yeah.
What does recovery even mean?
Yeah.
You know, we've got, you know, functional bodybuilding, the essentials to functional bodybuilding. Recovery is kind of its own bucket. So how do you, what are some words that come up for you and how we've spoken about recovery in the past and currently?
One is definitely mobility that fits into recovery. I think there's also active recovery. So using movement to recover rather than using movement to train and get strong and fit, although it all fits together. And then another thing that comes up is just how we tend to promote the concept of balance throughout everything we do. We balance movement patterns, we balance intensity efforts, and recovery is certainly a part of that because we want to balance our effort throughout the week so that there are times when we're pushing really hard, there are times when we're pulling back, but we never really lose our connection to movement.
Yeah. I agree with all those things, and I'll add 2 more like kind of thoughts, which is recovering of your soft tissue and then recovering of your neurological tissues or your nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
Those are two like important concepts I think that we like to think about when we address recovery.
Yeah.
Your muscles, and anybody, not everybody maybe can appreciate this or has experienced it or has had the awareness to connect to this, but maybe by describing it, you can think back on your training and be like, have you ever had a day where you're like, your calf muscles or your triceps were like just sore to the touch, like, oh my gosh, like that is, that's soft tissue damage. Like your muscle has been, the cell walls have been broken down. There's swelling that's happening in those tissues, and that's creating this pain sensation. But have you ever had a day where you didn't have like excruciating muscle pain, but you just felt like wiped out? Like, oh my gosh, like I got the shakes. I kind of want to go lay down. Like I can't even, I tried to pick up like the 20-pound dumbbell and it felt like it was 70 pounds.
Yeah.
And that's more of like, oh, my nervous system, the neurological tissues, nerves, your brain tissue, your spinal cord is all like a little bit fried, not damaged like in the same way that your muscle tissue like broke down. It's just that those nervous system tissues, they rely heavily on these, energetic charges, these electrical signals, and kind of like, when you have a power surge at your house and like the breaker like switches, like, well, your breaker box kind of, a lot of the switches got, tripped when you pushed it so hard. So we think about recovery in order to, how do we get the nervous system, that energy system, the brain system kind of revved back up to optimize its function? Or how do we get the tissues to like be less sore or, feel less junky?
Yeah. And obviously sleep is part of the equation, but I think what we're talking about today is more what can you do during your waking hours intentionally to help promote recovery as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Sleep can't be overlooked. And I think sleep probably plays into the nervous system recovery, the most. But yeah, looking at how can you spend your waking time. Mm-hmm. So we got a variety of different questions and some of the big themes that showed up. One of the big themes was, we'll start with mobility. You mentioned mobility being a big part of how we view recovery. Is where does mobility fit in to training time? Mm-hmm. Do you do mobility before? Are you supposed to do mobility afterwards? When's the best time for that to happen? Was there any other specific questions that you remember seeing that like to direct that conversation more?
Well, one I would add is just to make a little bit more clear the connection between mobility and recovery. Like, why is mobility important in recovery?
Great question. Well, first, I guess defining what is mobility, right? And there might be a better, sports science textbook definition, but mobility is just, as I see it, it's like, we have a concept of range of motion that, really like we talk about range of motion at joints because like, your knee can flex and extend and there's a certain range of motion that it can have, and your shoulder has, it can move in a lot of different directions. There's a certain range that it can have biologically, and then there's a range that you have today based upon how much you've moved it. So range of motion can be expanded or it can be contracted, and it's usually a reflection of how much movement you bring to that joint, and then to the extent you try and extend that range of motion through some form of stretching or strength training or a combination of both. And that's where mobility really comes like, together, is strength training and range of motion, trying to stretch the range of motion, but also get that range of motion strong at the same time. And so why is like mobilizing part of the recovery system? Well, as we train and we break soft tissues down and then they rebuild, and you're trying to build strength, and many people are maybe following traditional patterns of training where it's like, I want to get stronger, and strength is defined by how much weight is on the bar, or I want to build muscle, so I'm going to be just really focusing on optimizing my muscle contractions. I'm not really caring about range of motion. Oftentimes there's this connection between more training ends up with people getting less and less range of motion. And we try and combat that inside functional bodybuilding training by prescribing movements, tempos, and also teaching the value of range of motion inside of strength training, so that people don't take shortcuts and shorten range of motion and spend time at the bottom of their squat or spend time at the bottom of a dip where they can, train shoulder, extension or hip flexion. But coming back to how does then mobility play into recovery? Well, you being in your joints and your body being in a healthy state to go and tackle training, that's a big part of recovery. If you're feeling pain or you're feeling achiness, and your joints aren't feeling good, then you're not going to be able to perform, in the days that follow. And strengthening your joints at their end ranges, mobilizing, is a great way to set yourself up for better training in the days or the weeks that follow. A very strong and mobile joint, and with good range of motion, like a joint that has great mobility, is going to be much more resilient, much more capable of handling the demands and the stress of the training that's going to make your body change or give you that stimulus that you want. So that's where, again, mobility plays into the recovery concept. Is if you are practicing, if you have a regular practice of mobilizing, then you're going to be better set up to train well in the days that follow. Versus when you get super sore, the thing that most people want to do is move less because it's kind of painful. It's like, I'm super tight. I'm feeling really sore. I'm feeling that nervous system shakiness, and I just want to lay on my couch. Mm-hmm. And that is not going to enhance your mobility. It's going to actually lead to less mobility because you're being less active. You're being more sedentary. And do that for 2 months of a hard training cycle where you're not mobilizing and you're just resting on the couch, which is maybe good for your nervous system to just chill out, but it's not good for your joints. It's not good for your soft tissue. 8 weeks go by, you're stiffer, you have poor range of motion, and now you're less resilient to, training stresses. And now you get like a little hip twinge or back tweak or a shoulder, niggle that now keeps you out of training and you lose consistency.
Yeah. I was just thinking about this yesterday because I was very, very low recovery score yesterday on my Whoop. Shout out to Whoop. And I was definitely in the red and was feeling just like really low energy and achy and had neck pain. And I was just thinking to myself like, oh, like all I want to do is lie on the couch. And then I just thought, okay, there has never, ever, ever been a time that I can recall when I did a little mobility session and felt worse and like regretted that choice.
Right.
So I just kind of made myself get up and like took a bath and then just got on the floor and did some mobility and some stretching. And it's like, yeah, duh, like you feel better.
Yeah. And keep in mind, like mobility, the tools that we, teach people how to use for mobilization, right? Passive stretching, active stretching, different movement flows, things like that. They're all ways of just moving your body.
Yeah.
And movement alone, regardless of what the form looks like, is a really, we'll talk a lot about it today, I'm sure, but it's one of the most powerful ways to recover both your nervous system and your soft tissue. Mm-hmm. It's like Yeah, well, there's a lot, you have this substance inside of you that has all the healing power and all the healing, ingredients that you need to feel better. It's called your blood. And it's pumping right now as we're sitting here talking. But it's not pumping down to my calf muscle that much, because my calf muscle is, I'm sitting cross, one leg cross the other, and it hasn't moved for the last 15 minutes. And so my brain knows, like, well, let's not send a bunch of blood to that. Let's send blood to my small intestine right now where I'm digesting some of my lunch. Mm-hmm. But if I get up and I start doing some like static stretching or calf stretching or, forward folds or, a hip flow where I'm moving around, like, okay, now blood is now pumping to my lower extremity. Like my heart and my brain know to divert blood down to that area. And inside the blood is where all the macronutrients are, where all the micronutrients are, where all the oxygen is. And, it's a way to, when there's that pumping action down there, we're getting rid of like metabolites and things that have accumulated in the soft tissue or the interstitial tissue space around the cells of my muscles. And so that's all now getting pumped back. And when I go and I move, like, there's lymphatic drainage, which is what's taking all of that stuff that's in the muscle tissue from yesterday's training. That's just sort of like, we need to get rid of, and it's pumping it back to my heart so that it can get recirculated. And so yeah, movement, like you said, it's like, I've never done a mobility session where I felt worse after. It's like, yeah, because it's that movement that's so vital.
Yeah. And I think this is important to just highlight, because a lot of people think of mobility as almost a chore, where it's something I got to do in the gym. I got to spend an extra 15 minutes mobilizing. I got to go and do this one specific thing that culturally other people in my fitness community do to mobilize. But really what we're talking about is that there's a whole toolkit available to anyone and everyone that is basically a feel better pathway. And a lot of people turn to, I'll have a glass of wine, I'll have a cup of coffee, I'll sit and watch a show, some standard things to make you feel better. This is just what mobility is.
Totally. Yeah. Well, how about then so we've established some connection between mobility and recovery. Well, when we start talking about more of the specific mobility, like, how do I train this part of my body? How do I actually get my hips to be more, more mobile or get more range of motion? I want to improve my front rack position. And, are we lumping that in there together with this concept of recovery? And the answer is certainly yes. Yeah. Right. But now this is not just about like, how do I get my body feeling better? I'm like, I want to get my body to it. This is how, like, now mobility becomes training. Mm-hmm. It's not, you're actually now trying to actively change your tissue. And if anybody has done like hardcore mobility training, you will wake up sore from it. It's not just going to make you feel better, right? It's not like a super intense FRC session. You wake up the next day, you're like, man, I'm just like chipper. It's like, no, my hip feels like I, did some heavy squats yesterday.
Right.
And so none of these buckets, that we create, like, are, independent and never cross over.
Right.
Mobility is a recovery tool, but it's also a training tool. It's really a training, it's a way to express yourself in a training mentality as well. And so we got a lot of questions of like, hey, how do I change my hip tissue, my hip range of motion, or what do I do if I got lateral shoulder pain? And a lot of that is going to be using concepts of mobility and strength training combined to make, tissue changes at those different joints that are going to help you. And so you need to, I think that's important to, like, maybe not categorize that as like, oh, this is what I should do on my rest day. It's like you go on a rest day and you go mashing on your hip for an hour and you're doing this really intense, session to try and improve your hip range of motion. That might not be like energizing for you and like make you wake up the next day feeling ready to go squat heavy. That actually might take away from that. Mm-hmm. So there's just maybe add to the conversation of like, there's an intention behind each of these things. Like, what are you bringing to this? Is the intention to feel better, to get your nervous system pepped up for the next day, recover your, soft tissue and kind of get rid of some of the soreness? Or are we going into this mobility session to try and I'm trying to crank on these ankles and I want to get a little bit, another degree of range of motion in my ankles, and I'm going to be doing some hard work. Because I've been to Kelly Starrett to get worked on before, and, I'll walk away and be like, whoa, I just did the hardest workout of the month right there.
Right.
Yeah.
So would you say that there's sort of a Venn diagram of training and recovery and mobility, and maybe even cardio could fit in that middle section?
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, to me, I think that, we already really hammered this, but movement is such a powerful recovery tool. So if I had to list, what are my best, recovery tools? I always think some form of movement. And I think really very low demanding movements. There's a passive stretching routine, or a very, mellow yoga flow, or there's going for a walk in the woods, or pedaling slowly on the bike. Yesterday is a day where I don't do I don't do weight training on Thursdays and Sundays. And yesterday I'll do a cardio session, or I'll do 2 cardio sessions. But I could just tell, I was feeling kind of low. I was like, okay, well, I'm still going to do my cardio session, but I'm going to just turn down the volume on this a lot. And yeah, I did, all together, I think it was something like 20,000 meters on the bike, and I don't know, 80 or 100 strict pull-ups. But I went at a very slow pace for me, and I did 5 pull-ups every 2.5 minutes, or every 2 minutes. So it was 40 minutes of work, and I got a little sweaty and I was breathing, but I never felt like I was working too hard. The pull-ups felt easy every single round, and I just got a lot of movement into my shoulders, and I was just moving blood and sweating, for that whole time, and breathing at a moderate effort. And so I could have turned that into 20 rounds for time of 1K bike, 5 pull-ups, and gone hard, and probably finished 15 minutes, 12 to 15 minutes faster. And that would not have felt like a recovery session or something that helped me to feel better for the next day. This is sort of a theme that we talked about this past, a couple weeks ago around cardio. It's cardio is one of my best tools for recovery. But you can do cardio with I'm just here to move and feel better and to move some blood and to get those nutrients pumping around my body, or I'm here to do cardio to really train my aerobic thresholds and to really train, my metabolic work capacity. And the intention that gets brought to it can completely change and dictate whether this is gonna empty your tank or help fill your tank up.
Yeah. Well, I think that a lot of people were asking about how to approach recovery from a scheduling standpoint. How much time do you need to spend recovering? And should you work that into your training session? Should that be a separate thing? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that it's almost every question like that is well, it depends on the person.
Exactly.
It depends on what you're doing. What are your goals? But we like to give people some actual, take home points or action steps. So how can this fit, and how can you take these nuggets of information and apply it to your life? And that was where I was I think I put together kind of an equation. It's you've got the activities and the things in your life that empty the tank, and you got the activities and things in your life that fill your tank. And if you're emptying your tank more often than you're filling your tank, you're going to start to, crash. And if you're filling your tank all the time by like resting and relaxation and you're not emptying the tank enough, then you're leaving something on the table in terms of growth, development, getting stronger, faster, better, right? Like you have more room to stress your body because you have adequate time to recover. And so we're just trying to balance that. So like how much recovery activity is required? Well, if you push yourself a lot in the gym 5 days a week, then you better make room to do more recovery work or more movement-based, fill your tank kind of activities. There's a ton of other things that, of course, help to recharge, from how you eat, how you sleep. We're just not going to go into that today. But I used to think like we used to say this when we were competing and doing like CrossFit competitive training, was like, hey, for every 15 minutes of super hard work that I did in like a Metcon, I needed like 15 to 20 minutes of like recovery blood flow work on the other side of it. So it was kind of like this, almost like this 1-to-1 or even 1-to-2 sometimes. Like, oh, I just did 10 minutes, or I just did Fran, and it was like this, or a Fran-like workout. And for those people that aren't familiar with that workout, it's like in 3 to 5 minutes, you just completely annihilate your body. Like you have an out of body experience where you just, it's like, whoa, that was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. For those 5 minutes, you need 30 to 45 minutes to recover from that by jumping on a spin bike, going for a walk, like doing some mobility, some stretching, just to get the blood circulating through your body to help recover and get all the lactic acid out of the tissues, etc. So from a scheduling standpoint, how hard are you going in your training? And if you're going super hard, then you need to add a considerable amount of time to that. That's why with functional bodybuilding, we think about like this built not burnt concept. We are going to be very intentional about how hard we go. We want to go hard. I want you to push it, but I do not want you to push it all the time. If you push it, like, again, massive generalization here, but our average, viewer, it's like, or listener, hey, hit it hard twice a week. And then 3 to 4 days the rest of the week, move and be intentional and keep it at 70 to 80% and just get your movement in, right? For me, it's like I do cardio each day. That's my movement. That's 7 days a week. Then I lift weights 5 days a week. And of those 5, maybe 2 are like I'm getting after it today. Like today I'm squatting. Like Nate watched the squat day the other day. I was like, I'm pushing this. Today was not that day. I just did like a pump workout. Just got a really great upper body session in. Didn't go super heavy. So in total, that's 2 super hard sessions, 3 moderate weightlifting sessions, and then 7 cardio sessions that are mostly on the moderate intensity. Mm-hmm. So I'm heavily skewed towards just lots of movement, moderate intensity movement. So that's maybe a way to think about how do I balance this? And that's not just mobility sessions or movement sessions to recover, but like, how do I even approach my training? How intensely do I go? I think the other scheduling question that people have is like, okay, now let's talk specifically about mobility. Where does that come in your day? Do you do that in the early part of the day? Do you do that in the later part of the day? And I think I kind of I feel like a broken record sometimes when I say this, but I'm like, well, if mobility is important to you, you got to do it when you're going to do it. Mm-hmm. It's like people are like, hey, why do you do a sauna in the morning before you do your cardio? Isn't that like counterintuitive? You're like dehydrating yourself. Like, aren't you supposed to do it after training? And I'm like, yeah, you're supposed to, but I don't have the time to do it after training. Yeah. And that's how and it makes me feel good. And yeah, my morning cardio or my training right after is going to maybe suffer a little bit, but the value of getting that sauna session in every day for me is so valuable that I'm not going to try and like organize my life in some new way that isn't possible right now. And I'm just going to do it that way. Mm-hmm. So for optimal, performance, there is a recipe that I think has been tried and proven over the years where it's prior to training, you mobilize in a very specific, active, dynamic way to help prepare tissues. But you do not do a tremendous amount of static end range mobility, because that could lower your, just for lack of a better term, like just your ability to produce force and be strong and, perform well. So there's a specific model of how you approach mobility before training, which is what we put into all of our programs. All of our Persist programs have a prep session. It's the FBB Recover prep session, aka the warm up, but it's designed to be optimal for getting ready for training. And then after training would be a more advantageous time to do sort of the longer static end range of motion training, so that you now are not risking, okay, well, I've just made myself more vulnerable for, heavy weightlifting. It's like you're done with your heavy weightlifting. You're done with your conditioning. Now's a good time to do that. And for me, if I were to have it in a perfect world, it's like I would probably wake up each day and I would do some awakening of my body with a movement flow, which could be considered as a mobilization concept. So a hip or thoracic movement flow. I get that through my sauna and cardio. That's kind of my flow. Then training comes and I do a 5 to 10 minute active preparation mobilization. After training, I would do some shorter, 5 to 10 minute cool down, where this is just designed to get my nervous system to sort of chill, and I'm not going to do intense stretching. I'm just going to find a couple positions that I can just relax into and start to calm my breath. And then a more, complete stretching session would happen in the evening. And again, I would be careful in the evening time not to do super hard, intense stretching where I'm I'm going to change my hip and, really go deep. I would just again, passive, active, passive end range stretching, pick a couple positions, just sort of help, maybe do some foam rolling in the evening, something to just get some movement into my tissues. And then that would be the end of my day. And so that could be perfect. But if that doesn't fit your schedule, then I think there's plenty of good opportunities throughout the day to fit it in where it works. And remember that these are just opportunities to move and to sort of massage the tissue and put your muscles and your ligaments and your joints into different positions. The worst thing you can do for your recovery is to be stagnant, sedentary, do nothing, sit. So you're like, well, when's the best time to do it? It's like, if you've been sitting for the last 3 hours, right now is a great time to do it. It's a really good time to get up and move.
Yeah.
Don't overthink it too much.
Yeah. And this is one question we got, which is, what is the deal with the foam roller?
Yeah. What is the deal with the foam roller? I have, I'm certainly not the expert on foam rolling and foam rolling manipulation. And I have at times sort of been like, well, I'm not really a big fan of foam rolling. But I believe that's mostly because in the absence of all other types of movement, I think foam rolling is a great tool for people to bring some movement and some mechanical, manipulation to their body. It's like, hey, when something feels stiff, you don't have access to a massage therapist, so just go roll on it or go and mash on it, right? I mean, another alternative would be man, my legs are feeling sore. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to get on a bike. I'm going to roll my thighs out with the foam roller. they're all kind of accomplishing a similar thing. It's like with movement and with pressure and with like actual physical touch, we can change how the blood circulates into a part of our body, and we can change potentially how the surfaces of all the tissue, the skin and the muscles and the nerves, they're all sliding around each other. And so, I see some, back in the day, there's like CrossFitters that were, training at this very high volume, moving all the time. They're like, oh yeah, I don't do mobility. And I'm like, makes sense. You're moving all the time. Like you're going like, if you're constantly moving and our bodies are in motion, like you're just lubricating your body over and over again with blood and with, sweat and with just movement. But for people who are really not able to move that much, that's not part of their life. They have jobs that are sedentary. They don't have time to be moving for 5 hours a day. Then a tool like foam rolling or understanding like even these percussion, massagers, they're great. It's like, get that thing on your skin, get that thing on your hip and on your glutes, and just, get things moving in your body. If you're sitting at your desk and you can roll your feet underneath the desk on a lacrosse ball, heck yeah, that's fantastic. Mm-hmm. Would it also be good if you could go and push a sled back and forth on the turf for 10 minutes? Yeah, that would probably address your foot issues equally, if not better, but you can't do that. So grab a lacrosse ball. And so again, it's like, well, should I foam roll before I work out or after I work out? It's like, hey, use these tools to address intuitively what feels off to you. I already mapped out, hey, what would be like an optimal day, the perfect day?
Yeah.
Wake up, do your flow, prep session for 10 minutes before training, 10-minute cool down where you're just bringing your nervous system back down to neutral and you're getting some deep breathing and some passive stretching. And then in the evening before you go to bed, you're doing some foam rolling, you're doing some stretching, you're rolling on the ball on your belly, and then you're going to bed. Okay? If you need to do something outside of that because your life is different, then you should. You absolutely should. And feel empowered that like, hey, something feels wonky. Oh, I can grab my foam roller and roll on it. If it felt better afterwards, that's great. It probably isn't going to, foam rolling is probably not going to fix your mobility issues. I have not seen that, but it can certainly make your tissues feel better and encourage you to be more active because, oh, everything feels a little bit better. My thighs don't hurt as much. Now I want to go for that walk. And that's a positive thing. Yeah.
I kind of think of our bodies as like those watches that recharge when you move around and you kind of need to like get it going a little bit. And one thing that you've said before is something about the shapes that we make during our day. And sometimes I think about if I had a movie of myself throughout the entire day that was like on fast forward and I could see that I was just like sitting at my desk. It's like, okay, yeah, you can see if you step back and look at it in that way that we just need to get up and move a little bit more and find little opportunities to mobilize.
Yes. And so if that looks like a foam roller, if that looks like doing the couch stretch in the middle of the day, if that looks like, having a lacrosse ball that you smash on yourself or, hitting your thighs with a Theragun or something like that, or if it looks like just jumping up and going for a 5 to 10 minute walk, all of that is recovery.
Yeah. Or a little hip hop class.
Or that.
Steezy Studio. I'm obsessed. If anyone out there is on that app and wants to dance with me, please hit me up.
What's the name of the app?
Steezy Studio.
Okay.
Yeah.
Steezy Studio.
I highly recommend.
All right. Well, you Steezy Studio folks out there, slide into Satya's DMs, hit her up, and let's see. We'll catch you next time.
All right. See ya.
Bye.